Welcome to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif, and this week we have a special show.
We got a great show this week.
We spend our time talking about the real estate market. We talk about finance. We talk about home ownership and the different elements of home ownership, Mike. But this week, obviously, we are going into the holiday season, the Christmas season, and we've got sort of a special segment coming up in the last part of the show. And I don't want to ruin it, I don't want to give it away, but I think it's important that while we're talking about our own personal lives and bettering ourselves and taking ourselves to that next level, whether it's for personal reasons for our family or whether it's investment, we also remember that there are those in the community who don't have the same good fortunes that some of the rest of us have.
And 'tis the season to share and take note of that.
Yeah, so just make sure whatever you do, stay with us. Stay with us through the show because we've got a couple of special guests who we want to introduce you to and talk about a really important initiative that they're bringing to Barrie and Simcoe County, the surrounding area, and you'll want to know about it. And I know that Barrie is a city with a huge heart. People are always coming out, and we know that
we're a great
people,
city for philanthropy and just sharing and caring.
So we'll get to that for the third segment, Mike.
Yes, and I'm just reflecting, where did we leave off from our last show? We were talking,
what we were talking about was,
pick it up?
About getting into investment.
Yes,
So you want to be a landlord, basically. So
Yeah.
you want to be a property investor.
Yes.
And I think we talked about, you did a great job talking about the different geographic regions. We picked up
Good
on
investment regions, the different regions in Barrie. And I don't know that there's good and bad, there's good and better in Barrie, an area for investment.
Yeah.
And, you know, what I'd really like to do is just give a quick briefing on if you are that person who is thinking, you know, I want to get invested in real estate. The stock market, it's too volatile or too in the moment, in the present for me. And I think it's going to be a rocky thing investing in the stock market in the coming years for the time going forward, foreseeable future.
Listen, I'm not going to take away from some of the other, we already talked about.
You need a balanced portfolio is what we talked about.
But last week we talked about, I think it was last week, we talked about where were you when something else hit? And why weren't you prepared to dive in on it? But there are a lot of people who they're looking at cannabis offerings, they're looking at cryptocurrency, and they've ridden the wave, and we're seeing some of the downside right now. Do I think crypto's gone? Not necessarily.
But
Do I think we're off the high right now?
Totally throw that off, because the stock market is more and more emotionally driven than it ever was, because people are sitting at home. They're not working necessarily through getting their guidance from an investor or somebody who's managing their portfolio.
I think we came to an agreement that said, bar none, throughout the history of time, real estate has always proven to be a successful.
Always been successful. It's been a mainstay, and it's always continued continued increase in value over time.
So last week we talked about the regions. We talked about what to look for. We talked about characteristics of a neighborhood or of a region, of a city. Do they have public transit? Do they have industry? What are the driving forces?
You want to look for.
What are the things that you want to look for? And we also talked about dollar for dollar. If you pick the exact same home in Barrie versus the exact same home in Aurelia or Angus or Midland or Innisfil, what are you going to get more? Where are you going to get more return on your investment?
And that's good. That's, you know, you want to envision yourself as a renter. Imagine where they're going to be. You want to get out there and just talk to people.
Right.
Talk to store owners. Talk to people who live in the areas you're interested in. Get a sense of the integrity of the region, not just currently, but where's that region going? And if there's specific pieces of property that you might be interested in, know the potential for zoning changes there. Maybe in zoning changes you want to implement, because, I mean, it's good to just buy a piece of property, have a positive cash flow, but you may also want to it might be a two-part thing. You're gonna hold that property for a while, and then maybe you'll redevelop it down the road.
Let me back this up just a little bit, if I might. I'm going to put a little bit of an analogy in there. Anybody who's had children, certainly young ones, that, you know, you go from.
You start out that way, yeah.
You go from if you have the opportunity to enjoy breastfeeding, and obviously if you're a mom and you've had that connection with your child.
And now we'll go to commercial. No, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, you've had that connection with your child. Some people are on formula, some people are on bottle feeding, but then you transition into actually introducing foods, and 9 times out of 10, I'm going to guess that the little one wants to feed themselves.
Okay.
Right? I'm going to do this myself.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's all over the face and it's all over a mess and whatever. And you're like, well, no, let me help feed you first. And eventually you'll learn how to feed yourself. Right?
Okay.
Same thing with this. There's not much of it in anything in life. I want to do it myself. I want to prove myself that I'm strong, I'm independent, and I don't need anybody's help and I can take it on. And that's probably not the world's greatest advice.
No.
And the reason why I'm backing up is saying, you want to become a landlord, you want to get into the investment marketplace, you're going to want a hand. You're going to want someone who's been there before. You're going to want some guidance. You're going to want a solid,
yeah.
You're going to want to put good people around you. And I know you've got a list of
yeah.
people that you were saying is really important to have with you when
Yeah.
you venture into this.
It's not just important, it's crucial starting out, but talk to people who've been doing it 10, 20 years. They still have that circle of people around them for good advice and good knowledge. That applies all the way through.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
It does, but I think it's very much a natural instinct to say two things. One, when I'm rich and successful, I'll hire a property manager. When I'm rich and successful, I'll hire
Yes.
the accountant. When I'm rich and successful, I'll get someone else to do this, that, and the other, whether it's trades, plumbing, whatever. I'll figure it out on my own. And I'm going to say more often than not, it'll end up, when you do it yourself, it'll end up being more expensive or more frustrating, or you'll lose your spirit, or you'll end up paying for it 3 times because eventually after it breaks the first 2 times, you'll actually go and pay a professional to come and do that for you.
And that's when you are ready to do it.
Yeah.
And just some of the things you want to warn people of. The first thing is once you find that piece of property or those pieces of property you're interested in, you may consider purchasing. Crunch those numbers, and this is where, again, having a professional assist you, because you need a positive cash flow, or at the very least, you want to come out even every month on that investment. You don't want to be taking a loss. Sure, you may, when you cash out in the end, have equity revenues to bring
You got
back.
to carry it to get
but
the
you
equity.
need to carry it to that point too.
Yeah.
So
remember,
know
you
the
don't-
math, know the numbers.
You don't lose or you don't win until you sell from the
Yeah.
equity position,
Yeah.
until you sell. But in the meantime, it's who's paying down the mortgage and it's who's covering your carrying
Exactly.
costs and your expenses. And a lot of people also don't realize that, you may be paying the mortgage, you may be paying the taxes and the insurance, but eventually you're replacing a roof.
Yes.
Eventually, you're addressing a heating and air conditioning scenario or some type of a wear and tear scenario.
Yeah.
So you really want to be budgeting that. And I think we're going to do a show on that. We talked about doing a show on budgeting for that. But we've only got 1 minute before we go to the break. I think the key thing, and maybe you could touch on this real quick before we go to break, is the importance of setting expectations with your realtor, as you touched on at the beginning of the segment here, about making sure that you know what the future zoning is all about. Talk about that for a second.
Well, know where you're going. If you may buy into a piece of property, and again, you're not buying an emotion. You're buying, so that the numbers and the future works for this property. A corner property may not appeal to you if you're buying to occupy. You may want to be on a little court, but as an investor, you may want that corner lot. You've got the bus station right there. You've got added redevelopment potential with corner lots than you do on that court. And knowing what that's going to be, and don't go for that cheapest house that needs all the renovations, because you're going to be outputting so much cash in the beginning to do that. That's not the home you want to buy.
So let's talk about that stuff in a second, but wrap up 30 seconds just on what can a realtor offer in terms of looking at what you can expect is down the road in 10 years.
No, well, the realtor's going to help you to assess the numbers on those property. They're going to look at the history of what that property's done and what properties in that region have done. And if the realtor's doing their homework, they'll be able to tell you what the future plans are for the region that are either going to help or hinder the value of that property going forward. So
good.
These are all things you want from that
So
realtor.
when we come back from the break, let's touch on more about the mindset or the frame of mind of the first-time investor, and we'll talk about who they should be speaking to and what sort of frame of mind they should be going into this investment.
Excellent. And I would like to also touch on just a wrap-up of 2018 and a little quick look at where we're going in 2019.
We'll be back in a moment. And welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif, and we're talking about the fact that you want to become an investor. You want to be your own landlord. And Mike, before we went to break, we were talking about sort of the importance of getting to know the property and the importance of utilizing
The property, the neighborhood, the region.
utilizing a professional to make
market
sure that
and the
they can
direction of
also
the
tell you, are there zoning changes coming on down the road, so that no surprises. But let's get into just for a second the frame of mind of a first-time investor, a first-time landlord. I know that the first time that I bought a house,
Yes.
and I said, I am now going to be a landlord, and sort of your shoulders go back
Sure.
and you get broad and you get excited, and right? We got emotional though, and I did the classic mistake, and it was me. It wasn't my wife. I made the classic mistake that I think a lot of people make, which is I went in with my heart. Yes, I wanted to own the property and eventually be the king of the world or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. But I said, well, you know what? Who deserves this home? Who's our ideal tenant going to be? Let's find a family that deserves a beautiful home, and we're going to give them a beautiful home to live in. And we just went all out. We did renovations. We put in brand new appliances, brand new front loader washer dryer. We redid the walls. We redid the painting. We redid the hardwood. We put in tile. We put in fireplace. We did all sorts of things.
And how many years did it take you to hit the break-even point, if you've hit it yet?
I'm not sure. I don't know. Yeah. What I do know is this. Most people are good people. The majority of people are good people. However, there is a level of truth to the fact that if it's not yours, you just can't possibly have that same connection.
Pride of ownership
in terms of
is
taking care of it and pride of
yeah.
ownership. Here's the piece of advice that I would give to anybody, which is simply this. It's not, if it's your rental property, it's not your home. It is a business, it's a house, and it's a business.
Yes.
And have a business case and do what makes sense. Do what's right, because at the end of the day, the things that we talked about before, you've got to be able to cover your expenses, and you've got to be able to plan for the maintenance.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, it is a business, and it's really important that you get the emotional side out of it. One of the things that we do as well when we're dealing with private lenders and people who are investing in real estate as well, is we actually don't have them meet the client. And there's a reason we want to have
the emotion out of it.
We want the emotion out of it.
Yeah.
You go use a third person, because at the end of the day, if you need to evict somebody or if you need to enforce one of the elements in your contract, you need to be able to do it without emotion.
No, understood. And we should and could do a whole topic or a whole show just talking about tenant selection, tenant management, and how to be a good landlord to your tenant. And we will do that on
Good
a
and
future
fair.
issue. Good and fair.
It's not us versus them, and it shouldn't be.
And just have a look at what the Landlord-Tenant Act and how it applies and how it, it guides. I mean, we have a good provincial landlord-tenant. It's stringent, it's tough for landlords, but you got to work within those parameters, though. So we will talk more on that. And just to summarize, I'll just say, point by point, to be a landlord, you want to talk to people, you want to figure out how much you're going to need to borrow, envision your ideal renter, avoid fixer-uppers if you can. Estimate your rental earnings, tally your expenses, consider the appreciation of your rental property, and determine your cash-on-cash return rate.
So a couple things that we talked about. Yeah. So a couple things we talked about. One, you're not going to get the appreciation, you're not going to enjoy the appreciation until you sell or you pull out equity.
Yes.
But the other one that was really important that you talked about was avoiding fixer-uppers. And here's one of the things that I think a lot of people don't realize. You buy a fixer-upper, sure, because you're handy, or you have a family or friends who are going to help you out on this, or a partner who's going to help you out on this, that's terrific. But if you're buying a fixer-upper, and if you're having to get a mortgage where you're only putting down 10, 15, 20%, and you're asking a lender or a bank to come in with the 80%,
yes,
the bank's going to want to see that you've got income coming in on day one.
Oh, yeah.
They're going to want to see, well, if you're doing a fixer-upper and it's going to take you 3 months to renovate the place, 3 to 6 months before you're renting the place out, how are you cash flowing? Do you have enough coming in your day job or your other sources of income to be able to carry this? And if you don't, you're not buying that house.
No.
So buying a fixer-upper is not a bad thing.
You need to be able to cash flow right away.
So I'm not going to go into it right now.
And again, the money you invest, yes, it's going to pay back in equity down the road.
Sure.
But that's a long way down the road. You need to have your numbers working right from day one once you take down that property.
So I think the takeaway, we could again do a whole show on that.
We will do a number of shows on that.
Speak to your realtor, but more importantly in this particular case, make sure you're speaking with your mortgage professional so that you know that you're not going to get hit with a nasty surprise on the day before closing that the bank doesn't want to do the piece of business with you.
Exactly.
So you wanted to get into, though, a wrap-up of the 2018 year.
Here we are. We're into December now.
This is our last show for...
And it's our last show for the year. Yeah. It's been an interesting year. The number of homes for sale in Barrie was up. It was up higher, disproportionately higher than the number of buyers this year. And we did see a drop in activity and a drop in sales, almost around 17% from where we were at this point last year. That's a big drop.
17% drop.
17% drop.
So
is
inventory's
what
up,
CREA
but
is
actual
saying.
transactions are down.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, and key factors?
Well, key factors are the one we've talked about a number of times here was the implementation of these stress tests that our federal government has put in place to try and deliberately cool the market, because their fear was Canadians have far too much debt. Won't go into too much detail on our emotion on that at this point. But
Mike, maybe our crystal ball is not so foggy after all, right?
Yeah.
We
but
saw
it
this
has
coming.
Worked.
It has
it's cooled
worked.
the market. But what frustrates me is I mentioned that 17% number reduction in Barrie area. Nationally, it's down around 10%. So it's had that added desired effect in key areas that the province was focused on, Toronto and Vancouver, but it's also hit harder on some rural areas where the demands were high for
We're on a major
housing.
corridor.
Yeah.
And we're in proximity to Toronto,
Yeah.
so we definitely have the impact. We are not a bedroom community. We are definitely a community that is a major player, and we've got huge transportation links. We've got huge links to marketplace in the automotive sector, et cetera. And yeah, it did hit hard. But here's the thing: the experts are now saying this week, if you read the Financial Post, the Globe, whatever it may be, they're all saying experts are now telling the government, back off.
Back away, yeah.
You've done too much.
Yeah. Well, it was overkill. The pendulum swung a little too far.
Well, what they're also saying is,
if I may, sorry, I just need to point out with regards to that, the quieting of the market. A lot of that activity and a lot of that drop occurred in the first half of this year. And we've started to see from the end of the summer until now increases in the number of sales. So there is a correction underway, perhaps. It's certainly a change from what we've seen before in the right direction. So,
but you know what though? Building starts are even down. You were talking about that, right? Condo starts are down, building starts are down in general. And the reason being is they're saying, well, wait a second, the natural progression or the governor of the Bank of Canada and the U.S. Fed, they're all moving the interest rates higher. That compounded with the stress test is overkill. And they're saying there are people who should be entering into the marketplace as first-time home buyers who still are not able to, and that's not actually having a desired effect, right? And so as much as there were suggestions that we're going to keep seeing interest rates going up,
I think we will, and that takes us into,
I'm not so sure. You think we will? I thought we will. I'm not so sure that we will.
I just don't see. We think we'll see them climbing as steeply and as quickly as has been anticipated or predicted in the past.
Let me rephrase what I'm saying. I think we might see a softening of the stress test requirement.
We will.
A couple things are going to happen. We're going into a federal election coming up in 2019. We'll see what the actual results is, who the party is that will be in power, and what they choose to do nationwide. And we're about to go to break, but let me just wrap up with that thought. So we might see interest rates still continue to creep, but we might see a softening of the stress test because it might be deemed too much.
So they'll each
well, they've got to throttle it. You can't just lay a policy and then let it go. That's irresponsible. You've got to have someone at the switch who's actually paying attention.
And we're 3 years into our new federal government, who did promise by now, or at least a year from now, we would have the deficit would be neutral. We're still running up that deficit, and you need money to pay the interest at the very least on that deficit, and it either comes from revenues or comes from interest or from borrowing. So raising those interest rates is something that could happen. It's a whole show on its own.
So let's do that as a whole show on its own, but here's one thing that's really important. Our next guests who are coming up after the break. We are looking forward to having our guests from Youth Haven, and we're going to introduce you to a couple of very special people that Jennifer and Lucia, or Lucy as she's known in the community, who have a wonderful initiative that they want to talk about. And what's more important is we are talking about roofs over heads, and I think it's a very appropriate topic and a very appropriate guest to have on our show as we go into the holiday season. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
And welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. And as we talked about at the beginning of the show and at the end of the last segment, we're really thrilled to be joined by two wonderful people in the community, Lucy Gowers, who's the Executive Director at Youth Haven, and Jennifer Koplinski, who's on the fundraising team. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Welcome to Hitting Home.
And thank you for having us. This is really exciting for us to be here, because you probably know we're in the community. We've been around since 1987. and we've been helping youths since then. We've probably seen over thousands and thousands of youth come through the shelter doors.
Well, we did talk, our show is about home
Yes.
ownership, it's about rental accommodations, it's about just the real estate market in general.
Everybody needs a place.
Everybody needs a roof over their head, and there's nothing more important than our youth, obviously. So we're so glad that you're here. And Mike, I know that we were talking about an initiative, and
There is an initiative. Tell us more about this that you have.
Well, we've been around, as I said, since 1987. We've been helping youth throughout these many years. But we recognize that sometimes we just can't do it on our own.
There's a cost to
So,
it.
of course there is, and we do receive limited fundings from a number of sources. But a lot of the times, if we want to continue to provide case management and crisis intervention and counseling and referral services and care packages, we have to look to our community for help.
what kind of age group are you servicing as a client?
16 to 24 is what we serve right now.
Do they tend to be kind of sort of lost in terms of
Some
there's
do.
children's aid help, but their mandate
Through the
sort of
cracks, yeah.
drops off? And
You know, it does. I mean, we've had some youth that were part of the foster care system,
Okay.
but they've aged out. And so once that happens, they
Right.
have nowhere else to go. Where do they end up? On the streets, right?
So you offer shelter and incentive and guidance.
We do. I mean, that's our whole goal, is to be able to help a youth who is experiencing homelessness
Yes.
at that time, to
You have
provide
a
them with-
program right now too, right, to help them transition into.
We do.
so talk about that, yeah.
We have a transitional side of Youth Haven. So we actually have 21 beds altogether, which includes our 5 beds from our transitional side. And transitioning is for those youth that basically are out of that emergency, urgency state.
Right.
But now that they've learned some tools and some skills, and they can actually rent a room from us.
So tell us about that, because it was interesting. In the break, you were telling us about this actual education program that you have.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I think it's so appropriate because we're talking about like homes, and as you said, it's about everyone having a home and a place to lay their heads. And so we have a Rent Smart program that we've basically rolled out recently, where we work with youth to come in and teach them basic skills. What do you need to do to be a great tenant? It's about budgeting your money. It's about really understanding what your responsibilities are. What's the responsibility of a landlord, and how can you work best together?
Yes.
So we have rolled out this program. We've had a number of sessions. We've actually had some really great success stories. We've had a youth that came to us about just over a year ago. She ended up in our transitional program, eventually found a permanent house, and now she's living in her own place, and she's moving on beautifully.
Those are great stories, yeah.
It is a great story. She received a rent supplement from the county, and so she's set for the next few years, which is amazing.
Excellent.
Now it's about them being able to live their life the best that they possibly can.
So in the remaining moments then, tell us about this Christmas initiative, and I believe you said it's in its 5th year, and
Yeah, you're on the fundraising committee, so
Yeah.
tell us about what you're
Yeah,
doing.
yeah.
And can I hand this to you? We've got this fantastic box. Tell us about the box.
Well, there's a team of us
Boxes
going
of hope.
around with these beautiful boxes, trying to raise funds for Youth Haven for Christmas this year. It's $50 per box. Each box gives a kid a present, food and toiletries, which is absolutely amazing. So in the morning, they actually get to come downstairs and see their special gift under the tree like every
That's
other
great.
child will.
You know, it's funny. We often hear these poems or these memes, and they say, you know, it's not about what you gave me. It's about me knowing that you were there for me.
Exactly.
And that's what this really sounds like.
That's really what it's about. So then when the kids get up in the morning, they're not being left out. They're going to go out on the streets and be there with their friends and be able to say, hey, this is what I got. And then they can open their box
Oh, what's
up,
inside? Okay.
pull something out,
Yeah.
and then there's something like a warm hat to keep them
Nice.
warm during the cold season. That being said, this is Boxes of Hope, and we are fundraising for that. Today is
So
the launch.
$50
Yeah.
gets you toiletries.
Yep.
And a gift.
Gift.
And
Food.
food. Okay, I just want to make sure we're
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
100%.
it's money that the community, you're raising funds from the community. It's money that's coming to the community, but the community knows that it's essentials as
Yes.
well.
Yes.
I mean, it's cold out there,
Yes.
and I know
Yeah.
that your beds, I know that your youth, your clients are out.
Yes,
They're out of the center during
They
the
are.
day.
Yeah.
So it could be a pair of mittens, it could be a hat, it could be a scarf that's in there, something like that.
Exactly.
And this is important.
are you still still looking for donors to contribute to what goes into the boxes. Too.
Oh, absolutely.
yes.
And
In the
she's made
community.
it so easy this year. The website, what was
Yes,
it?
it's www.boxesofhope.ca.
Yeah.
It's great. We
Joe's
really
going to have this on the bottom of the screen
Yes.
for us. I know
Yes.
Joe, it'll be on the bottom of the screen, so for people to reach out to you. So www.boxesofhope.ca. And they can also Google Youth Haven Barrie.
Youth Haven, yes, exactly. www.youthhaven.ca to get all that information about our Boxes of Hope. You know, we talk about what they're going to get. I think what's really special about Boxes of Hope is that our youth will get that feeling of belonging and that someone's actually taking the
Exactly.
time to care about them, because that's something that they lack right now.
Do you know what's interesting, though? I mean, I've been listening to what you've been talking about, and I think it's quite possible that I'm not in this position, so it's very hard. I'm not even going to pretend to imagine. Okay, I mean, it's not even fair for me to try and pretend to imagine what one of your clients must be going through. But what I do know is that oftentimes we look at a social service organization such as yours, and we say to ourselves, you know what, they're there in the moment of crisis.
Yes.
But that's actually not what you're there for. You're there to take them out of your client out of the immediate danger or the
Situation, exactly.
immediate situation. But what you're doing is so much more, and you're preparing them for the exit.
Give them
Exactly.
the
Exactly.
tools.
Get back on their own feet.
Exactly.
Right?
Because it's so important for them to be able to find a permanent house.
Yes.
But it's
Right.
just as important for them to be able to maintain it.
I mean,
And
if I
that
had
was
my
the
way,
challenge.
you'd be out of business. If I had my way, you wouldn't have to service
Yes.
any clients.
Wouldn't that
And
be
I think
amazing?
And that would be
amazing.
wonderful.
Yeah.
That should be
Yes,
your
of
mandate,
course.
right? Obviously.
Well,
Of
but-
course.
it's a great program you do, and we're such a great community here in Barrie, and you know, good people like you are doing this work and giving it their time and efforts, and it's great to see this happening.
Well,
Well-
Andrea, she has actually, the MPP, has actually challenged a couple council members. So if any other council members want to get on
You
board,
know who you are.
yes, contact Lucia or myself or Arif or Mike and let them know that you are going to be part of the challenge. So what we're trying to see is what council member can actually raise the most funds for Youth Haven through Boxes of Hope, and putting forward an effort to get the word spread even more in Barrie.
Perfect.
Yeah,
We
and
are
that-
out of time, unfortunately. We're totally out of time, but I want to thank you, Lucia and
Thank you
Jennifer,
so
for
much.
joining us.
Thank
On
you.
behalf
Thank
of
you.
Mike and myself and Rogers, obviously, Rogers TV, thank you for being there. Wish you the best of luck, and Google Youth Haven, and you'll get lots of information. But I wish you all the best in your campaign.
Thank you.
Thank
Happy
you so
holidays,
much.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye.